Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is just to take my brain out of more background work over the course of the week and to move into a process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason I do these, and the second is just to allow you, the viewer who have come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. That is why I do these. Now, if you happen to be a regular viewer, you will recognize my surroundings are a little bit different than normal. I am actually at a conference this week in the Twin Cities as I am recording this, so I am recording this from my hotel room. Also, the lighting is a little weird, but oh well, we can't have great production value every week. But that's kind of what's going on here and why things look differently. Clearly, I'm not sitting in my office today. This coming Sunday, which is the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, and is January 28th, 2018, if memory is serving me correctly, because I don't have a calendar right in front of me. Fourth Sunday after Epiphany, our assigned text comes out of Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. Side note, and this is kind of a fun little detail, I've recorded a video on this before. It was 3 years ago when at the last point we were here in the lectionary, and ironically I was at the very same conference or the same place for a midwinter conference here in the Twin Cities, and so that video also happened to be me in a hotel room too. So hey, small world, cool. Apparently I come here every 3 years. But Mark chapter 1, 21 through 28. Now, of course, being in Mark chapter 1, we are very early in Mark's gospel. We're still here in the season of Epiphany, and the season of Epiphany we continue to remember or to focus in on ways that Jesus has been revealed to the world. And we've seen that in different ways. We, of course, have had the baptism of Jesus when the Holy Spirit descends upon him and the heavens are ripped open, and the voice of God the Father claims Jesus as his son. And we've seen it in the way that Jesus calls his disciples. The first four disciples here in Mark are Andrew and Peter and James and John. All that has happened. We've heard very briefly here in Mark about the temptation of Jesus, although we haven't focused on that story in our passages as of late. But in Mark, we hear about the temptation of Jesus was happened right after the baptism, and it's almost like a side note that he goes out in the wilderness for 40 days where he's tempted by the devil, and we move right past that. We don't get any of the details of it. And all of that kind of stems from the fact that Mark moves very quickly. It's, of course, the shortest of all four Gospels. And the action moves quite quickly just all around. And there's a theme I often kind of chuckle about in Mark's Gospel, that everything happens immediately. That's a word in the Greek, which, of course, I can't remember the word off the top of my head, but it pops up like all the time. It's almost a transitional word. Like immediately this happened, and immediately that happened, and immediately that happened. We'll hear it like 3 times in the passage when I actually get to reading it. So the passage today, we've had those other things that have already happened. So we've moved very quickly into the action here in Mark's gospel. We're still in the first chapter. A lot of times the first chapter is very introductory, not so much here in Mark. It's like, hey, let's immediately get into the action. And today we actually find Jesus' first action within his ministry. In the beginning of it, we'll hear that he heals a man of an unclean spirit, it's not the first words we hear from Jesus. Actually, the first words we hear from Jesus in Mark are "follow me," which is worth noting too. But this is his first divine action, the first action of his ministry. And first are always important in each gospel. They're important to pay attention to, and this one's no different. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and read this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. Jesus and his disciples went to Capernaum. Capernaum is a town right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and it's where Peter lived, and where Jesus actually did a fair amount of ministry. He was in Capernaum quite a bit. In fact, some think that he actually perhaps had a house there, and he lived there at different times among their time of travel. We don't know that for sure, but we kind of speculate that. Anyway, okay. So they go into Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there That's the immediately. It's translated a little differently, but that's an immediately. Immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit convulsed him, and crying with a loud voice came out of him. They were all amazed and kept asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. All right, so that's it. Okay, so there's some different things happening here. Jesus goes into the synagogue, and he's teaching, and apparently his teaching is different from the scribes, they're called. The scribes would go on to become the rabbis. At this point, it's kind of a transitional time. When Jesus was walking around, the temple still existed in Jerusalem, and the synagogues, while important in the individual communities, were not so much the central basis for the faith community. That was still the temple. However, by the time Mark was written, which was several decades down the road, the temple had already been destroyed, and so then the synagogues would have been more important, and the scribes had really become the rabbis, and the rabbis were the experts that would teach. But now Jesus teaches as one with authority and not like the scribes. Always makes me wonder, well, okay, so like how do they teach? What's different? And we don't exactly know, but that's okay. But that's what Jesus is doing. He's teaching, and what's he teaching about? Well, he's teaching about the good news that the kingdom of heaven has come near. That is the message that Jesus carries, and how is that teaching punctuated? Is his authority punctuated? Well, it's punctuated by the presence of this unclean spirit, whatever the heck that means, in this man, in the synagogue, in this important religious place, in this what we would call a church. That's where this is all happening. And I'm really drawn to that in some ways we could consider that the healing that happens here is secondary to the teaching, that it is simply a highlight of the teaching. And that's a sense that we get from Jesus at different times, that the signs that he does, they're called signs in John, and they're called miracles in other places. But these miracles that he does are simply to illustrate the power of God at work in the world, as a highlight to the teaching that the kingdom has come near, that the power of God is on display. Sorry, I had to wipe my nose there. So that's kind of what's happening. And there's a lot of debate about the spirit itself. What does it mean that it's an unclean spirit? And does this, what does that mean? Some will speculate that this, since we hear it shakes the man and makes him cry out, is it what we would now call mental illness? Is it some physical ailment like epilepsy or something of that nature? And I think there's merit to that, because over the course of now 2,000 years, our medical understanding has increased dramatically, and we have a better understanding of what's happening within the body and within the mind. And so in that time, would they simply call those things the result of some unclean or bad or evil spirit within them? Maybe. I'm not going to dispute that, but I'm also not going to confirm that. It's all we can really say, is this a demon? Is it a spirit? Is this an ailment? What is it? We don't know. It is something that hinders the good life of this man. And this is a theme that I kind of think about a lot, and the people in my congregation have heard me talk about it. We go all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2, mainly 1, and the creation story. As God is making the world, however that's working, God continues to call it good. Or tov is the word that I always use. That's the Hebrew. And that God continues to bring chaos towards order. That's what each step of creation is doing. And that as God has done that, and God creates humanity in the image of God and calls it very good, uber tov, like tov tov, that there's this good path, good life, good journey, whatever you want to call it, that God hopes or desires for humanity. And there are things that hinder it. Our own brokenness hinders it. The power of evil in the world hinders it. The brokenness of our reality hinders that good path. And this unclean spirit, whatever it is one of those things that hinders, for this individual, for this man, that good tov existence that God desires for him. And Jesus will overcome that and does overcome that. And whatever else is going on, this is about Jesus showing us in his first divine action that he will take on and he will defeat those things that stand in the way of our tovness. I get stuck on that. And why? Well, because Jesus is God in the flesh, and Jesus and God's love for each of us is so deep that in the end, Jesus looks at this man, love and compassion, and he looks at the unclean spirit, whatever it is, and he rebukes it. He tells it, be silenced. You can also hear be muzzled. That's part of the translation as well. It's like be muzzled. Essentially, Jesus looks and says, that's my kid. Shut up and get out of him. If you've ever been in mama bear mode or papa bear mode because something is like threatening your kid, then you have a tiny sense of this love, this immense protective love that God holds for each of us, that God will free us from that which hinders, which keeps us down, which breaks that which somehow makes us outside. I could go with this and try and explain it better, but whatever it is, God will ultimately triumph over it, and that has already been accomplished through Christ. Now and not yet, and this is a Lutheran thing. We talk about this a lot. We've been given this promise, and yet the promise is complete and yet has not come to fruition because we are still broken. We are simultaneous saint and sinner, another Lutheran theology thing. But what does that mean? That means that the promise is given to us that somehow, ultimately, God will free us from that which hinders. But we also see that the powers of darkness, the powers of sin, whatever we want to call them, whatever this unclean spirit is, Jesus tells it, shut up and get out of him. But it doesn't go down without a fight. It goes down, but it doesn't go down without a fight. We hear that it shakes him violently and that it cries out in a loud voice before it comes out. I think that's very true in what we see in the world, that the promises of God are real, and the promises of God are the light. Got a lamp right here next to me. You can see it shining on my face, and another one behind me right here. This is very much John's gospel. Light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. I often cling to the idea that darkness is the absence of light. So when there is light, darkness loses. Period. End of story. That's just the way it is. But darkness is not going to go down without a fight. The powers of evil, the powers that seek to hinder, are not going to give up easily. But the promise is, and we see it on display here, and this is the teaching of Jesus, that the kingdom has come near and that you are a part of it. You are invited into it. You're invited to come into this tov, this good existence that ultimately will culminate as we come into ultimate relationship with God in the life to come. That's a lot of what's going on here. I'm kind of surprised as I got to talking with this short passage how much there is. But if you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.